Nobody really talks about Edmonton, at least not like this.
Every time we come back here, we end up saying the same thing. This city feels completely different than what people imagine.
And after visiting Edmonton this many times, that still surprises us. Because from some angles, this doesn't even feel like the Edmonton people describe online.
And later in the video, we'll show the part of Edmonton that surprised us the most.
Because I genuinely think Edmonton is one of the most misunderstood cities in Canada.
And I think once you actually spend time here, you start realizing why.
I think most people outside Alberta imagine Edmonton as flat, industrial, maybe even boring. Like, if somebody asked you to picture Edmonton before visiting, I think most people would imagine highways, suburbs, cold weather, maybe hockey, and that's about it. And to be honest, before we started coming here more often, I probably thought something similar too.
Yeah, because Edmonton doesn't really market itself the same way some other Canadian cities do. You constantly hear about Vancouver, you constantly hear about Toronto, even Calgary gets talked about more online. But Edmonton kind of sits quietly in the background.
And then you actually come here, and the first thing that catches you off guard is the skyline, especially when you see it from across the river valley.
That's the thing nobody really explains properly. The river valley completely changes the feeling of the city.
And Edmonton actually has the largest urban park system in North America. Most tourists probably have no idea about that.
And you feel it almost immediately when driving through the city. 1 minute you're downtown, surrounded by buildings and traffic, and then suddenly everything opens up.
That contrast makes Edmonton feel layered. Depending on where you are, it almost feels like you're in a different city every few minutes. And honestly, I think Edmonton hides itself. You don't fully understand the city right away. The city slowly reveals itself the longer you spend here.
Yeah, because the best parts aren't always obvious immediately. You kind of discover them gradually.
Like the skyline reveals. Some of the best views happen when you're not even downtown.
Especially crossing the bridges. Every time you cross one, the city suddenly looks differently again.
And that became one of my favorite things about Edmonton. You're constantly rediscovering the skyline from different angles.
And I think that's part of why the city photographs way better than people expect to.
Yeah, Edmonton actually looks really cinematic in certain lighting, especially around blue hour.
That's another thing people don't really expect. The city has a mood to it, especially once the lights start coming on at night.
Let us know in the comments. Did Edmonton look like anything that you expected?
Because I genuinely think most outsiders picture something completely different. I think this is the side of Edmonton people almost never see online, especially around Whyte Avenue and Old Strathcona.
Yeah, people talk about Calgary way more, but Edmonton has way more personality than people expect. This area actually reminds me of older neighborhoods you'd find in eastern cities.
It feels older, more textured, maybe less polished, but in a good way.
Exactly. Some cities feel like they're trying really hard to impress tourists. Edmonton doesn't really do that, and maybe that's exactly why it surprises people.
Even without crowds everywhere, the area still has character. You can feel personality in the buildings, the storefronts, the streets, even when it's quieter outside.
Yeah, and it doesn't feel generic. And honestly, that's becoming harder to find in cities now.
I also think Edmonton feels more creative than people expect.
And here's something most tourists probably don't know. Edmonton hosts one of the largest fringe theater festivals in the world, which makes sense once you experience areas like this.
Yeah, the city has a more artsy vibe than outsiders probably expect.
And I think that's why Edmonton grows on people. The city has way more personality once you actually spend time in it. I also think Edmonton feels more relaxed socially. Like, people don't feel rushed all the time.
That's actually true. Even just walking around these neighborhoods feel calmer compared to bigger cities.
And maybe that's part of the appeal. The city feels more approachable.
Exactly. It doesn't feel like it's trying to overwhelm you.
And I think that changes the way you experience the city too. You slow down a little more. You notice smaller details more.
Even just walking around with a coffee and exploring feels enjoyable here.
Yeah, it feels less like checking tourist attractions off a list and more like experiencing the atmosphere of the city itself. And if you enjoy seeing the side of places people don't usually expect, subscribe because we've got a lot more videos like this coming. But Edmonton also feels strange sometimes, and I mean that in an interesting way.
Yeah, the city changes fast depending on where you are.
1 minute it feels energetic and urban,
And 5 minutes later, it suddenly feels super quiet.
and nobody really warns tourists how spread out everything feels. You spend a lot of time driving in Edmonton. Distances here can be really deceptive.
Yeah, because on map, everything looks relatively close together. But once you actually start moving around the city, you realize how big Edmonton really is.
And honestly, that changes the rhythm of the trip. You don't experience Edmonton the same way you'd experience somewhere compact like Montreal or Vancouver.
But at the same time, I think the space gives Edmonton part of its personality.
Yeah, some of the best views happen when you're not even downtown, especially when the skyline suddenly appears across the river valley.
And because the city spreads out so much, the skyline reveals ends up feeling bigger.
That's true, actually. You notice the skyline more because it keeps disappearing and reappearing.
And honestly, I think Edmonton feels calmer than most people expect to.
Less intense, less rushed.
It doesn't really have that non-stop big city pressure feeling.
And depending what kind of trip you want, that can actually make the experience way better. I also think Edmonton feels more genuine than people expect. Like, the city isn't trying to convince you to like it.
That's actually a really good way to describe it. Edmonton doesn't feel performative.
Exactly, it kind of just exists as itself, and then slowly surprises you the more time you spend there.
And I think that's why some people end up loving Edmonton after visiting.
Yeah, because the city feels authentic, not manufactured.
And sometimes cities that don't try too hard actually end up being more memorable.
For people who live in Edmonton, what's the most underrated part of the city? Because honestly, every time we come back, we notice something completely different.
And we still haven't shown the part of Edmonton that surprised us the most. What surprised you most about Edmonton?
How many bridges there were.
Cool. I think the biggest surprise is how much depth the city has visually.
Yes, especially once you start seeing the skyline from different areas.
Because from some angles, it barely even feels like the city people describe online.
And maybe that's the biggest thing nobody warns tourists about. Edmonton completely breaks expectations.
The funny thing is, the more times you visit, the more we actually appreciate it.
It's not trying too hard to impress you, and maybe that's exactly why it ends up surprising people.
Because the city kind of reveals itself slowly.
Yeah, Edmonton isn't really a city that hits you immediately. It's a city that grows on you once you spend enough time there.
Yeah, and I think that's why so many people end up liking Edmonton more than they expected to.
Because once you stop comparing it to what you imagined, you start appreciating it for what it actually is.
A city with way more personality, atmosphere, and beauty than most outsiders expect.
And honestly, that's probably why we keep coming back.
Not because Edmonton is trying to be flashy, but because the city feels more interesting the longer you spend time there.
And I think that's something a lot of people don't realize until they experience it themselves. If you made it this far, hopefully this video gave you a different perspective on Edmonton.
Because it definitely changed ours over time too.
And if you enjoy this kind of travel videos that go a little deeper than just tourist attractions,
there is a lot more coming.
Also, if you've been to Edmonton before, did the city surprise you too?